My name is David Yun, and welcome to my Viewfinder. This is a podcast where I speak to photographers about why they shoot, as opposed to what they shoot with. My hope is to produce inspiring content to get you out there looking at the world creatively. Each episode will end in a thought or project to help bring this to the fore, so make sure you get to the end and interact with me. If you're interested in continuing this project with me, you can help me out by clicking subscribe and leaving me a review on your podcast platform of choice. You can also find me on Instagram at My Viewfinder Podcast. I'm on Twitter at MVF Podcast, or you can email me directly at mvfpodcast@gmail.com. Art is often associated with mental health, usually in some dramatic and brutal way. Think of the phrase suffering for one's art. But sometimes it's related in a sense of therapy, coping, self-discovery. Today I sit down with Kristofer Schofield to talk about the latter, and perhaps the first one too. I first saw Chris's work at Gravity Cafe in Inglewood several years ago, and it's breathtaking stuff. It's very prairies, but even I appreciated its tone. We discuss how his struggles with his mental health line up with his approach to photography and rally car racing, and next week straight edge hardcore music. But I'm getting ahead of myself. What is the line between solitude and isolation, healing and expression, art and madness? Let's hear what Chris's experiences can teach us. This might be a good, easy start. Favorite weather?
I'm not a fan of the very cold or the very hot. So anywhere sort of between like 10 and 20 degrees and partly cloudy. Could be partly because of my day job too, because I don't really like it when it's really hot because I work outside and or very cold. Like sort of like the spring and fall type weather where it's, you can wear a hoodie or a t-shirt and you'll be okay.
As far as being a, landscape and building photographer, do you track weather? Is it something that's part of your decision to go out?
Yes, I also do a bit of storm chasing. I've been involved with the storm chasing community, and I go out a couple times a year. And that's the other thing I shoot, is
tornadoes,
dramatic weather. I've never seen a tornado. I want to. I've seen funnel clouds and stuff close to tornadoes, and I've seen some crazy weather and running away from storms where it was throwing like softball sized hail and stuff. And I've met a lot of good photographers and just good people in that as well. And also there's a lot of drama in that whole scene, so I try to stay away from any of that.
I won't ask for specifics, but
arguing on the internet is the stupidest thing in the world.
My Viewfinder is a proud member of the Alberta Podcast Network, locally grown, community supported. If you're looking for more Albertan podcast content, check out their website, albertapodcastnetwork.com. If you're looking for them on Instagram and Twitter, the handle is @albertapodnet. This is a message from one of our sponsors, Rumi. Cold drafts, flickering lights, and where's that leak coming from? If you've ever wondered what's really going on in your home, Rumi's Ask a Home Inspector service can help. Connect with a certified professional home inspector by phone or video call and get those questions answered. Rumi will let you know what's easily fixable with a little DIY, or when you might need to call in some professional help. Visit rumi.ca, that's RUMI.ca, and book your Ask a Home Inspector appointment today.
Yeah, when I first messaged you on Instagram, it wasn't like, hey, can I come on your podcast? It was just like, hey, I appreciate your podcast, because it wasn't like all about gear, like how you shoot or anything. It was more like just, why behind it, and, just about the people behind the camera sort of thing, and not about the camera. And it's nice to have that.
Thank you. I mean, this is, to be honest, why I asked you to be on here, because, as soon as I looked at your profile and I was like, oh, I've seen this shit. I was like, I need to find out, why anybody does this, because I've tried it like once or twice, And it's
Hmm.
like you said, there's
It's
environmental therapy in it, but it's not how I connect with the world.
it's
So
it's definitely not for everyone. Yeah, it's a lot of either silence driving around, or it's a lot of podcasts I listen to, or music. Yeah, it's definitely not for everyone, and not everybody enjoys that type of stuff. But at the same time, like I don't enjoy taking pictures of people or weddings or anything. Like some people absolutely love that stuff. I no, thank you.
I was thinking after we chatted a bit is maybe we can talk about coming to Alberta, becoming a photographer, and I think this idea of like being a visual, or presumably visual or a practical person. I think they all kind of intertwine. So
I think I touched on the bits you're chatting where I just find a lot of this stuff, like photography wise and whatever, just very therapeutic. Yeah, just struggling with a lot of social anxiety, ADHD, depression, BPD. It's just it's probably why I've chosen the direction of photography I have, because I don't have to be around anybody.
yeah, we should definitely talk about that. I have lucky distinction of being crazy enough to have a AHS assigned psychiatrist, so I don't have to pay. So I'm the
Yeah, I used to have that,
it's fun, right?
or well, I used to go to like a at the Schumer. I went to like this group therapy stuff that was based on anxiety. Going would just throw me into panic attacks,
Oh crap.
so I just ended up having to quit.
Is it like a
And
CBT
then,
type of thing, like cognitive behavioral?
no, I did a bit of that before. It was focused on anxiety.
Oh,
And then you had an assigned therapist. And then my therapist left because she didn't like the direction of AHS was going with certain things. They were just like 20 weeks and turn around and push the person
get
out.
out. Yeah.
And she wasn't liking that. And then the therapist I ended up getting told them my concerns that I had before were, especially with my ADHD, I had therapists who were like, well, maybe you're just not trying hard enough. Then he actually said that to me, and I called him out on it. And then the next session he did it again, and that was the end of our sessions. Yeah, it's like you can't tell me I'm not trying hard enough. You don't know how hard this is.
I uh, I went to a lot of different types of therapists before I found my current one. I can definitely at least say, I mean, I wasn't there with you, so I can't speak to your
Yeah,
experiences, but I think you've noticed too. It's not like capital TH therapy. There's an answer. They're applied by other human beings. So
hmm,
there's a lot of people that I won't say they shouldn't be therapists, but they didn't. Yeah, I didn't get a lot out of our relationships, and
yeah,
I just got lucky, I think, or blessed, or whatever. You want to talk about it. 5 years ago, meeting the person I'm working with now through some drama, and
yeah.
but I got lucky because he and I get along really well. But that's a tough thing.
That's good.
Yeah, that's a tough thing.
Yeah, no, I had a late diagnosis of things. I was like 35, but it really helped. Like it answered a lot of questions of why I felt so fucked up all the time, and sort of answered about, oh, so that's why I do things the way I do.
We can do a photography metaphor and say,
Yeah,
he needed a lens to put it into
yeah.
focus.
Well, and the whole like growing up, like the punk rock straight edge stuff, I was like very anti-medication, stuff like that. So I tried like everything possible without knowing what my actual issues were, of just like naturopath and herbalists and traditional Chinese medicines and five element healing, chakra clearings, all that stuff, and nothing would touch it. And then I just finally was like, okay, let's try this. And even like therapy wasn't working until it was actually on a podcast. Somebody was talking about how their ADHD was affecting them. I was like, wow, that sounds really familiar. So I was at the Calgary Counseling Center at the time, which I won't go back to again. It was just like, hey, could I see the doctor, not self-diagnosing myself, but just if anything, just to rule it out. And then yeah, it came back with like depression and anxiety and ADHD. Yeah. And that was like when I was like 35. So well, like 8 years ago, 9 years ago. And the medication really ended up helping my photography a lot, where you hear that common thing about like going on medication is going to zap all your creativity, which it did the opposite for me.
Yeah, I think there's I don't know, I don't want to say stigma or stereotype, but it's mental illness is definitely poorly communicated, particularly in
Hmm.
films and movies, and so a
Yeah.
lot of expectations are very strange. I remember, maybe 15 years ago, there was a Time magazine. I don't know if they're still around, but they did an article about a very famous abstract 80s painter and how once he was diagnosed with bipolar and put on these anti-schizophrenic medicines, whatever, he stopped being able to paint in this bombastic, right? And how the interview is talking about, I think, with his mother, how it's a trade-off that they accepted because he was about like he was so far gone in his disease at that point in his 50s that I think he was going to kill himself several times, and like it just spiraled so badly out of control. So then it sets up this idea that you have to be kind of insane to be creative,
Hmm.
which I also find is fundamental. I mean, I'm probably insane, but I don't think it's fundamentally true. I think that living is creative. So if you tap into it,
Hmm.
it doesn't have to be painting art. It's just doing anything
Yeah.
is expressive, right?
Like, the really dark times, I won't lie. So, like, yeah, they did help me get some more creativity, but to be able to actually harness it and move it forward, being able to deal with the depression and anxieties and stuff really helped. Like, I was able to actually then, no pun intended, but like focus on stuff with photography better and know what I wanted to do instead of just like, I'm going to do everything. And I wasn't happy with any of that.
I'm starting to feel like I'm at that crux spot too. Yeah, I don't know if I can generalize that every photographer starts off kind of not knowing where they're supposed to be, so they dabble in everything. That's probably not true, but I have felt like I've weakly put my hand out to every genre. It's not like I've committed,
Yeah.
opened up a full-on studio or anything, but definitely. And we talked about this, before the recording. Is I saw some of your work. So what was displayed at Gravity a couple of years ago, and then when we quote unquote met on Instagram, I immediately recognized the photo. So there's a style and a thematic sort of structure to the work that you're presenting now. And I think it does speak to some of these topics we're talking about already. Do you think that if you look, or and I shouldn't say think, like when you look at photographs you're taking when you first started out, I mean, how different
Oh,
are they?
yeah, no, there are a lot. Like, I was just looking back at some of the stuff over the weekend and I found like a whole bunch of like test print stuff. And I was just like, what the hell was I thinking? And like just all these like weird angles and I don't know. I know kind of what I'm going for now. And it might be really repetitive because like all I kind of shoot is the abandoned shit and like desolate prairie scenes, but it's weird because yeah, it's really weird saying this like this, but it's almost like I'm going to go visit friends just because like, I usually try to find the most like stark, sort of barren type places where like there's nothing else really around and there's not a ton of buildings. And I find that it's almost like, I think I mentioned this in our chat before, sort of like a self-portrait in a way. It's kind of reflecting on how I feel in my place in the world. Like it's hard to put into words, but
When you look at stuff that you started taking pictures of and where you're at now, is there sort of a story that emerges to you now about where your brain and your self portrait, your self image was, and how it's developing? Because certainly, and I've even had practical questions of like how you even find abandoned houses in the prairies. If there's like a support group, like a Facebook group where people tell each other GPS coordinates. But I do remember a friend of mine once took me out to one, but he worked for CN Rail. So I think like people in that area just knew what's happening
yeah.
out well, boondocks is how I see it. I don't know if they say that in the prairies, but
Um, to answer that part of the question, I started driving out in the prairies in 2008 randomly, and it started with following. I still do participate in car rallies, and there was a navigational rally that I had done a number of times that went out to Drumheller and back. So one Easter weekend, I went out and just sort of followed the route by memory and just started shooting stuff along the way, and that sort of got me really interested in finding abandoned stuff because I came across all these things. And I went out again on Sunday, out toward Drumheller. I was gone for like 12 hours, 500 kilometers, whatever. And it was amazing. Just, I found another like 4 or 5 places I've never been to before. And I just keep stumbling upon places after, over 10 years of just going out there. And I was just listening to one of your episodes either today or yesterday about how the first time you went out to the mountains and just how small it made you feel. I feel that in the prairie as well. And it's just really sort of puts in perspective just how small you are in this world, because the sky is endless, especially compared to Toronto.
Yeah, we talked about how you're from back east too. I definitely felt like the moment we moved here, we understood why they call it big sky country or whatever it is.
Yeah.
It's a strange feeling, right? Like,
Yeah.
I feel like in Toronto you never look up.
Or like, it's just going back and visiting, like it just feels, even not in Toronto, but just outside. Like my dad lives in Peterborough and my mom lives out in Warkworth, and just driving out there, it's still like the skies just don't feel as big. And you don't know it until you experience it. It's hard to understand.
Well, I think even the idea of coming out here, and then, we talked a little bit, you brought up a little bit this idea of ADHD and having to get diagnosed, but I think it's kind of funny to think about depression, mental health, and then you having the energy to just suddenly drive out for, what is it, 12 hours? It requires a lot of focus. I mean, I know when I was in the pit of my depression, I was literally just laying down, like people are listening can't see what I'm gesturing at, but the floor right here. And I was just lying down there for 8 hours a day between having to drop my son off at daycare and my wife at work, and then having to go pick them up. And I just didn't want to I didn't want to move. I mean, I wanted to do worse things, but I couldn't get up. I do remember after kind of bottoming out that one of the things that got me back actually was hiking. And so because I had that 8-hour window, I started driving out to the mountains. Sounds like a little bit like I went west and you went east.
Mm-hmm.
But so you're into rallies and you're driving out by yourself. What's happening there? Do you already own a camera, or are you already taking pictures at that point? How do we get to abandoned houses specifically?
Yeah, I had a camera at that point. I had just recently got my first digital camera. Back in the 90s, I was shooting 35 millimeter, and I had a dark room and stuff back in high school and stuff. And then I moved around a bunch and sort of fell out of photography for a while, and then sort of slowly got back into it just with like cheap sort of point and shoot cameras and stuff. And then got a Canon 30D, and then started from there again, and just a whole lot of learning. But yeah, just going out and randomly shooting stuff, just whatever looked interesting. I did shoot the fast car rally stuff as well, where they shut down the roads and it goes as fast as you can from point A to point B. I competed in that for a bit as well, but it just got too expensive. On like forestry roads, like gravel roads and oil field roads out, there's a couple areas around here that they hold events. There was down in the Porcupine Hills, the Rocky Mountain Rally used to be held down there. And then in Kananaskis, sort of along Powderface Trail, the road that connects the bottom of 66 over to 68. It's a 34-kilometer road that's really fun. And then there's the forestry demonstration road that's usually a part of the Kananaskis Rally. And then the Cochrane Rally, which is up north of Waiparis.
What is it? What kind of cars and what are you doing?
Pretty much everything. Like it's the full-on like roll cage, helmets, fireproof suits, stuff like that. So, and it's as fast as you can go from the start of the stage to the end of the stage, and it's racing against the clock. You have a driver and a co-driver, and you go the day before and you write your notes for the road, and then which is all done at like 60 kilometers an hour, and it's strictly enforced. And then on the race day, then you go out and you go and race. And then whenever I couldn't afford it, I would either help out with one of my friends as his service crew. So after every few stages, then they come back in and you fix if anything's broken on the car, or else I would go and shoot the rallies. And yeah, it was really a lot of fun. I've met a lot of people through that. Haven't made any money out of it with the shooting, but it's cost me a lot more because it's eaten a few shutters on cameras and stuff because of dust and whatever. Yeah, met a few other photographers through it, and they're really good photographers. We share ideas and stuff back and forth with each other. So yeah, it's the rally stuff. But I sold my car in 2015, 2016, something like that. Just couldn't afford it. I had an old 87 Corolla GTS. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, it was one of those things where I built a rear-wheel drive car and people are like, why are you building a rear-wheel drive car? You're just going to be slow. And so I went out to prove them wrong. And yeah, I beat a lot of the, just on regional rallies anyway, a lot of the all-wheel drive turbo cars, and got on overall podiums and second and third, and led Kananaskis Rally for a while once. That was a lot of fun. Yeah, just going like 140, 150 kilometers an hour on a gravel road, and it's a lot of fun.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm trying to put that together. One level, rally racing is just cool. And I remember growing up in the 90s, Subarus and Citroens it was just cool to watch that shit on TV.
Mm-hmm.
But, from a photography standpoint, or maybe even, let's say, a psychology standpoint, that's a pretty high energy world.
Yes.
And the photography I know you for is this serene, sort of meditative prairie abandoned house photography. So they feel like opposite ends of a spectrum to me. What's changed the most from being a rally car driver to being a prairie photographer? Or are you the same kind of person and just doing different things?
I think I'm the same kind of person. I had one of the reasons I had to quit was money, but also kind of had to step away from it for a while because I have, going along with some of the mental health things, if I'm doing something, I have to like fully, and that's like what I breathe, and that's who I am, and that's all I can think about. And it was really, really hard not to be able to afford to race anymore. So I had to fully pull myself away from it for a while, and I didn't go to any of the races around for like a year and a half, 2 years, and just barely had any contact with anybody for a while. And after I sold my car, I ended up buying a medium format digital camera because I wanted to get out of rally to focus on my photography more, because I wasn't able to do both. I couldn't divide my attention enough. So I was doing both for a while too, like the long exposure stuff. But the long exposures I've been doing since 2011, I think. I took a workshop with Mark Kogel. Used to be from Vancouver, but now he lives in Germany again. But he had a long exposure workshop in Calgary, and I went and did that, and it just totally like turned a light on inside. It was like, that's sort of what I was missing for what I wanted to do with my prairie photography, and just like seeing the long exposures and what I could do with it really sort of changed the game. And then all I did for like 2 or 3 years was just every photo I was doing were long exposure photos, and a lot of them are just horrific. But like, because I would just shoot anything, and I would also get just really frustrated if there wasn't clouds. But that's changed, and like if it's just completely overcast with no definition in the clouds, clear blue sky, or then cloudy, like I can adapt to that now. It gives me a different feeling toward the cloud, like toward the photos. Like I tend to have like really bright photos or really dark photos now, and the darker ones are usually when it's cloudy, and the brighter ones are when it's not.
What was it at that workshop that turned that light on? There's so many different genres. So in this case,
yeah,
you saw this master show you something. What did it speak to? Like
he had a prairie series that he did, and he was doing a lot of grain elevators and some abandoned stuff. But just something about it just really spoke to me. I couldn't really put a finger on it. Then he did a printing, like he came back to Calgary shortly after, like a couple months later, and did a second workshop on like editing and printing. And only like three of the people from the class before that came. And then I ended up going out for a day shooting with him too. And then we've become good friends since then. So it's been really nice, and it's really helpful to be able to just, bounce ideas off him or talk to him about it, and hearing his feedback about, the progression from me.
From a process perspective, then, what does it mean to be a long exposure photographer? So in my mind, you need to have patience. I don't have a lot of that. It seems like you have to be very planning oriented. It doesn't look like something intuitive at all.
It helps you. It really makes you become really deliberate in what you want to do, because you're spending anywhere between, for a lot of mine anyway, are like between 4 and 12 minutes long. They're in the middle of the day, just with a 16 stop ND filter. And then it's just a lot of patience, and just, it's very therapeutic because you're just sitting there waiting and there's not a whole lot to do. So I just embrace being out there, and then just the silence. Like there's times where like you're just sitting there, there's no birds, no wind, no noise, and it's just silence. And it's one of the most beautiful things. Like it's some of the times I feel the most alive is when I'm out there in the middle of nowhere, like not seeing anybody for like hours, and just sitting in a field shooting this abandoned house that has nothing around it. It's very helps clear my head, because my head feels like it's going a million miles an hour most of the time. So it just helps reset things. Going out shooting is sometimes a necessity, just for helping with calming stuff down in my head.
It's funny. I mean, I definitely understand parts of that. As a photographer, I love, I don't know, what do we say, being in a zone or whatever. But I also have this thought that I think sitting alone in a field would give me anxiety. I don't know.
Yeah,
it's interesting.
I have a really hard time being in groups of people of more than 2 or 3. It's just the anxiety I get is really debilitating, and I just shut down and can't function. It makes it really difficult going out to events, or when we used to be able to do things. With going out with my girlfriend to different things, it was like, it's frustrating for her at times, because like she would like to go out and do things, but then sometimes I just can't, or like it looks like I'm having a horrible time, but actually I'm enjoying myself. And mix that with my Finnish heritage of being Finnish people are generally a very antisocial type culture, and we don't smile a whole lot or whatever, so people just think I'm not happy or grumpy or whatever. It's like, no, actually I'm quite enjoying myself. Just sitting in the corner and just listening and not participating.
I met a woman from Finland once, and that's a crazy language, man.
Oh yeah.
It's beautiful in its right, but it's like so abstract. I think it's fairly unique, right, in the European linguistics or something like that.
Yeah, my mom was born there, and she moved here when she was quite young, but I've tried on numerous occasions trying to learn the language, and it's difficult. Like I know a few words here and there, and when I lived in Toronto, I was around a lot more Finnish people, so I could understand a bit more. But after moving out here, I just kind of just lost it all. But I have a really strong sort of attachment to my Finnish roots in a way. There's just something that always, like I've been there twice, and it was one of the few places where I felt like I was at home. which I haven't had really in many places at all. I don't know. I have a really strong attachment to my Finnish heritage. I have dual citizenship, so I have an EU passport. So
That's pretty sweet. Yeah.
It's kind of my plan B if everything goes to shit here, like really badly. I can escape.
Yeah, that's cool. I wish I had an EU passport. I feel like, yeah, like you, that it'd be nice to have a plan B.
Yeah, and I have cousins and aunts and uncles out in Finland who I'd like to go see again and stuff, and we keep in contact through like messaging and email and stuff.
I think why I brought up having anxiety when I'm by myself, I think there's a distinction between isolation and solitude. You know, it's weird. Maybe I'll put words in your mouth, but it sounds like when you're with people, you feel isolated. And then when you're by yourself, you feel like you're where you belong.
Yeah,
It's interesting.
and I guess when I'm with people, there's more pressure to perform in a way or like act a certain way or whatever. Where when I'm by myself, I can just talk to myself or it's not like I act really much different, but I don't have any of those outside pressures, so I can feel really relaxed.
This episode of My Viewfinder is brought to you by the Calgary Foundation, proudly supporting community needs for 65 years. Empathy, kindness, generosity, we are united in our desire to give, to inspire hope, and transform the lives of people who are struggling in turbulent times. And the Calgary Foundation is here to help. From mental health programs to environmental causes, the Community Knowledge Center website features profiles of charitable organizations, all searchable by area of interest. Be inspired by compelling stories. Be informed of innovative work. Be responsive to the needs. To connect to hundreds of outstanding charitable organizations serving our community, visit ckc.calgaryfoundation.org. To learn more about Calgary Foundation, visit calgaryfoundation.org. So, what does it mean to isolate, and what does it mean to embrace solitude? Now, there's a spiritual component here. The journey to learning oneself is always difficult. In my opinion, we can't learn anything of value without pain and loss. But as we work through these inevitable problems, we have the opportunity to build ourselves, our sense of self, and our sense of how we exist in the world around us. Some of us, like Chris, work best alongside it, on the periphery, documenting its beauty. Others want to be embroiled within it, thrashing about in the mosh pit of social interaction. What about you? What does your approach to photography say about you? Perhaps when you take your next picture or reflect on the project you're currently working on, you might see the relationship creative expression has with your own mental health. Your images can reveal where you were, where you are, or where you might be going. Perhaps this week, let's take a few minutes, or a 12-hour drive in your car, and look for that silence Chris talks about to reflect on how this art form, or any art form, can work as a great reprieve, a way to connect to others around you and share the burden of all of this living. It's actually a lot more rewarding and empowering than it sounds, at least coming from me. Do you have a favorite sound?
Silence.
Of course.
There's just something about like everything being dead silent and quiet, like not even the wind rustling or birds or animals, just being surrounded by nothing